everybody, it's your old pal Sam. Well, hey, you know what? If you're just discovering us for the first time, I'm Sam Squatch, all right? Creepy Acres' very own resident Bigfoot, all right? Now, if I'm being totally honest here, folks, I don't know why they call me a Bigfoot. I mean, my feet, they're basically in relative scale to the rest of me, so I don't know why the hell they call us that. But anyway. Now, I have also been called fat ass, and while that does hurt, it's accurate. I get it, all right? Now, that joke is just there specifically to let you know Creepy Acres is cryptid comedy, but not for kids, all right? Now, I get what you're thinking. Sam, if you're going to do a joke like that, why wouldn't you go on with like horse dick or monster dong or something like that? And the truth is, well, that's never happened. That's no one's ever said that to me. But anyway. Now, as promised, here it is. This is it. It's our inaugural. It sounds weird. Inaugural. Welcome to our very first podcast! Yeah!
History is rife with tales of the inexplicable and the unknown. Stories so bizarre, they send the fingers of doubt creeping into the recesses of our very minds. Join us as we investigate.
This week in Creepy History.
And now I'm going to turn it over to our host, the one and only, Laura Kram. Laura, take it away.
Am I, taking this seriously? I mean, I'm kind of feeling goofy right now.
God damn it, Laura Kram. Jesus Christ. Look, just say something like, welcome to Season 1, Episode 1 of the Creepy Acres podcast. This week in Creepy History. And with me, as always, is my co-host, Sam Squatch. How you doing, Sam? Something like that.
Stop telling me what to do.
Look, I am not trying to Squatch-splain stuff to you here, all right?
Hi, I'm Laura Kram, and welcome to Season 1, Episode 1 of the Creepy Acres podcast. This week in Creepy History.
Nice.
With me today is my lovely co-host, Sam Squatch. Hi, Sam.
Hey, how you doing, Laura? I just gotta say, thank you so much for that warm introduction. You only sounded half dejected, which I gotta say is better than what I normally get. Thank you so much.
So according to the script, it says banter is next.
Oh, God. Who the hell wrote that? That is just lazy.
Give me some banter. What's some good banter?
We're supposed to improv now? Oh, my God. You know, I blame this writer's strike, but God bless those people. They're making magic. They're making magic in Hollywood. Well, I'll tell you what. I have to say, I think this may be the only podcast with an actual Sasquatch as a co-host. I'm just saying.
I think that's right. But you know what? There's so many podcasts out there.
I know. We found a hook.
Welcome, everyone.
So today we're going to be talking about the Murphysboro Mud Monster. Oh, that's right. The Big Muddy. Yeah. All right. So we're going to turn it over now to Nathanial Leonards, and we'll be back right after this.
The Big Muddy River, a 156-mile-long waterway that snakes and twists its way through southern Illinois before ultimately emptying into the Mississippi River. Along this meandering path sits Murphysboro, Illinois, a small town of barely 7,000 residents. Here, the river dips and traces along the southernmost edge of the town, forming Riverside Park, where on a warm summer day, one can find the area alive with the hustle and bustle of fishermen and recreational boaters alike, loading and unloading the watercraft at the town's public boat ramp. However, as the sun sets, a change befalls the area. Under the cover of night, the secluded location becomes a popular destination for young lovers seeking a late-night rendezvous away from prying eyes. Such was the case in the wee hours of Monday, June 25th, 1973, when Randy Needham and Judy Johnson find themselves parked at the corner of Lyndale Avenue and South 23rd Street. However, their midnight tryst would soon be interrupted by unearthly screams emanating from the nearby woods. And soon came another sound, the sound of someone or something shambling toward them in the inky darkness. What emerged from the gloom was a towering 7-foot-tall monstrosity, covered in a matted light fur, caked in muck and mud. From it came inhuman sounds that alternated from roar to scream to growl. The young couple was shaken to their very core. Terrified, they flee, and at 11:55 p.m. that very night, they report their encounter to the Murphysboro police. Soon, officers M. Lindsay and Jimmy Nash are dispatched to go investigate the area. Needham also returns to the scene, accompanied by Deputy Sheriff Bob Scott. The group's search uncovers numerous strange and erratic impressions that are left sunk deep into the soft, muddy earth. These bizarre tracks are 12 inches long, but only 3 to 4 inches wide. Photos are taken and included in the report. Some of these photos survive to this day. Around 3 a.m., Officer Nash and Deputy Scott's investigation brings them to the river's edge. Suddenly, Nash draws his weapon as a feeling of unease washes over him. Just then, an unearthly cry rings out from the nearby woods. Nash would later explain.
There was no screech owl, no coyote. I don't know what it was.
Now fully unnerved, Nash and Scott flee the area. This was only the beginning. The very next night, the creature would be seen again, this time by 5-year-old Christian Burrill, who's catching fireflies in his family's backyard. He would run inside his home, screaming he had just seen a big white ghost. His family would brush it off as simply the overactive imagination of a child. That is, they would have, if not for what happened next. 10 minutes later, and just a few houses away, teenagers Randy Creeth and Cheryl Ray are sitting on the patio when something steps out of the trees and into the backyard of the Ray family home.
What's that?
Cheryl races inside to turn on the exterior lights, while Randy steps off the porch to get a better look at the intruder. As Cheryl flips on the switch, the light illuminates the yard, and Randy finds himself staring at a monster. Like the beast witnessed the night before, it stands 7 to 8 feet tall, weighs 300 to 350 pounds, and again is covered in a matted white fur that is slathered in mud. Creeth adds that it was huge, broad shoulders, long arms, and while it is too dark to make out any facial features, he does note that the air was filled with the stench of a swampy river bottom. Cheryl alerts her mother, who calls the police, and once again, Officer Nash is dispatched to the scene. This time, however, he's accompanied by an Officer Man Waring. The two are also joined by a pair that Murphysboro police have worked with in the past, Security Officer Jerry Nellis and his trained police dog, a German Shepherd named Reb. The group begin tracking the creature immediately.
Get it! Come on, get that. Get it! Come on, get it, boy!
Soon, they find a trail of broken wheels, which they follow for over half a mile. Reb stops along the way to sniff and stomp at a strange black slimy substance the men find periodically along the trail. Eventually, Reb leads the men to a barn owned by Ralph Buller. But try as he may, Security Officer Nellis simply cannot get his 80-pound canine to enter the structure.
What the hell's wrong with you? Get in there. Go get it.
Even when he forces Reb through the door, the trained police dog charges back out in fear. The men nervously enter the structure without Reb. Flashlights drawn, they search the interior and ultimately find nothing. The trail has gone cold. While the area surrounding Murphysboro, Illinois, has had numerous sightings of strange unknown beasts over the years, as well as reports of farmers finding their livestock and even hunting dogs dead and mutilated, no definitive answer has ever been found. Even now, all these years later, the true story of the Murphysboro Mud Monster remains a mystery.
Whoa! Wow, that was pretty cool. Yeah, what'd you think, Laura? What'd you think?
Isn't it just a muddy Sasquatch?
What?
Were you in Illinois?
No. This has nothing to do with me, okay? I don't even know where this is coming from. Okay. First off, this thing's fur is white, okay? Now, you may notice my fur is not white, all right? Yes, I did just start dyeing it not that long ago, but that has nothing to do. Not back in the 70s. Back in the 70s, I was like a golden god, all right?
Ooh.
Not like now. I mean, you know, age caught up to me, but that's not the point. That's not the point. The point is this: we don't even know if this is a Sasquatch, okay? We don't even know. This could be anything. This could be anything. Any type of hairy hominid, all right?
You guys are all the same.
Oh my God! What? Are you serious right now? Are you serious right now?
I said it. I went there.
Well, in that case, just out of curiosity, being that you look like the sweet spot right between Alyssa Milano and Eva Menendez, how are they doing? How are they doing, huh? I mean, you must know them, right? You guys look the same, right?
Well played.
Yeah. How's it feel? You think what? You think just because this thing might be a Bigfoot, I know who it is?
Yeah.
I mean, I do, but God damn it. I do know him, but God damn it. I don't like the fact that you thought that.
So we have Chad Lewis on today.
Ooh.
Do you know who he is?
I love Chad Lewis. He's my buddy.
Who is he?
Who is Chad Lewis? Oh my God, Laura, your words are they're like tiny little daggers right into my heart. Oh my God. Okay, look. For our audience who may not know, Chad Lewis is an author and researcher, all right? Now, he has been featured in numerous documentaries and TV shows, including The Unexplained with William Shatner, and he was also featured in a video game, Until Dawn, all right? But most notably, he is an author behind numerous books, and I mean numerous. Now, he has done The Road Guide to Haunted Locations for Florida, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Iowa, Illinois, South Dakota, okay? He also did Lake Monsters of Wisconsin, okay? And of course, you cryptid fans out there, you may have heard of a little thing called the Van Meter Visitor, all right? He put that guy on the map, tell you that right now, all right? And of course, he also wrote Wendigo Lore, okay? Which is an absolutely terrifying but fascinating book about Wendigo phenomenon. And most recently, he did the Wisconsin Guide to Haunted Places, all right, which is a little bit of an update of his previous book. But my favorite, Supernatural Dares of the Midwest. Oh my God, that book, my God, what a treasure. What a treasure that book was.
I thought you were talking about Chad. I was say, yeah, he is a treasure.
Well, that goes without saying. I'm just saying, but the Supernatural Dares book, I have never lost so many friends so fast. My God.
Is that good, huh?
It's so good. Look, I'm going to tell you right now. You get a book like this book, it's like an escape hatch for life. Okay. You know what I'm saying? All I have to do, one of these ding dongs that I hang out with, right? All of a sudden they're getting on my nerves. I just pull out that book, right? Hey, look right there. It's a dare. You got to do it. And then they do it. And then they're gone. It's perfect. Oh my God. I am not a good friend. I am not a good friend. Anyway, what were we saying?
But today he is talking about the Big Muddy Monster, and he has a book on it.
Oh, you bet your sweet ass he does, sister. His book is entitled The Big Muddy Monster, Legends, Sightings, and Other Strange Encounters.
And he co-wrote it with...
Was it Kevin Lee Nelson?
It was.
Oh my God, I love that guy.
Me too.
His beard is majestic. It almost seems supernatural.
It's good.
All right, and with no further ado, here he is, the one and only author, researcher, and I like to sometimes think my best friend, the one and only Chad Lewis. Here we go, everybody. How you doing, Chad?
Great. After that, I'm itching to get back down to Southern Illinois hunting for the Big Muddy.
Okay. Guys. Hold on. Look, I just got to get this off my chest. Otherwise, it's going to bug me all night. All right. I just got to throw it out there. Okay. I know the Big Muddy. I know that's its name. Okay. I know it's named the Big Muddy. Okay. But the Big Muddy, it just sounds like a big drink you'd get at a nightclub and like you and all your girlfriends would share it, okay? You know what I'm saying? Like there'd be like 4 straws or something like that, okay? Or it sounds like something horrific that happens to you in prison, okay? Okay, there, I got it out of my system. Go ahead. Sorry. Laura, take it away.
All right. So, Chad, you wrote the book, The Big Muddy Monster.
Well, I have to say I co-wrote it with my co-authors, Noah Voss and Kevin Lee Nelson. And it really was, we were working on something else about this creature in Illinois called the Ocquaqua Squawker. From the 1940s, this community was being terrorized by a creature, and we probably thought it was a panther or a cougar. So we were trying to do a whole book on that, but that kind of fell through. And we said, we're not that far from Murphysboro. Why don't we just take a closer look at this Big Muddy Monster? And that's when we really set our sights on digging deep and heading down to Southern Illinois to see if there was anything to dig up after all these years. And we were amazed at what we were able to find.
Now, when did you guys write that book?
It came out in 2019. So from 2017-ish, we were working on it. But I had been in the Murphysboro area sometime years earlier presenting, and people were telling me stories. My co-author, Kevin Nelson, had filmed a pilot for a TV show down in the Shawnee National Forest, which is located in that area of Little Egypt.
Not to interrupt you, Chad, but just a quick question. Now, I've heard that area referred to as Little Egypt before. Why exactly is that?
A lot of the towns are named after towns in Egypt, and there was a lot of Egypt influence, Egyptian immigrants of that area promoting Southern Illinois, which is odd to think at that time, but so you get a lot of they're pronounced differently here in the U.S., but you get a lot of the same Egyptian towns in Southern Illinois. So the whole area of Murphysboro, Carbondale, and that general region of the Shawnee Forest is referred to affectionately as Little Egypt.
That is fascinating. I had no idea.
Were you expecting some sort of pharaohs or pyramids?
I'll be honest with you. I had no idea. I thought maybe like those big, huge earthen mounds that the Native Americans had made. And maybe they had somehow associated those with like the Egyptian pyramids or something like that. I have no idea. Honestly, considering the time about when that would have happened, when they would have named it that, I was expecting something a lot more racist. Anyway, Chad, go on, please continue.
So we were familiar with the area. We had been there, but we never had time to really dig deep and to get into the story that it takes for a book on the subject. So we were very excited to make our way back down there and really spend some time getting to know the people, the legends, and the landscape. people are not familiar, Southern Illinois is the South. Like they forget when people think of Illinois, they think of Chicago, they might think of Springfield, but when you get down to Southern Illinois, the landscape changes.
It's beautiful.
The accents start to come in, that Southern accent. So you feel like you're much further south than you are when you're in Southern Illinois.
So, Chad, just out of curiosity here, are we talking about like, are we south enough where we start referring to all soda pop as Coke, you know, or we start calling all valleys hollers? You know what I'm saying? Is that what we're talking about here?
Yes, the terminology changes, the dialects change a bit, and sometimes for us Northerners, we have a hard time. Some in the backwoods of some of the people you need subtitles for when you're speaking with them, but they probably think the same thing when we come up here and hear the Fargo accent of Wisconsin.
Right. All right. So the first reported encounter was the couple, right? Making out at like the Lover's Lane. Is that correct?
Well, that's when the story broke and became an international sensation. And that's when monster hunters from all over the country descended on Murphysboro, and they were camped out. They had their weapons, their guns, their cages, their nets, you name it. Just all hell broke loose because that received international attention. And that's what I thought when I first started researching it. But what we found is that sightings had been going on for many generations. In fact, back in 1949, they were offering a $100 reward for the capture of a mysterious creature that was plaguing an old ironworks, like a salvage type yard on the outskirts of Murphysboro. So the sightings had continued through the 50s, the 1960s, and the 70s, but it really exploded after that Riverside Park sighting of the two lovebirds who were interrupted from their nightly courtship.
I know how that is.
Sam, you've probably been in a few of those.
Oh my God, Chad, you have no idea. I mean, hey, at first I was like, hey, you know those chains and cages and all that? That just sounds like a fun Saturday night, you know what I'm saying? But no, seriously. Oh my God, if I had a dime for every time I had a lovely little lady Squatch back at my place, you know what I'm saying? You know, there I am whispering sweet nothings into her ear. And all of a sudden, there they are out in the woods. There are them Squatchers looking for me once again, ruining my good time. And I'm just like, hey, shut up! I'm trying to get laid. Oh boy, if I had died for every time that happened, I'd have I'd have a solid like 25, maybe 30 cents tops. I do not have a good batting average. I just don't. Anyway, so what were you saying?
And what's interesting is that and they made a lot of publicity because a lot of people believed the couple's story because they were having an extramarital affair. And people said, well, they wouldn't have gone to the police and risked being outed if it wasn't something that was very important. So a lot of people took credibility of their statement from the fact that they had a lot to lose in coming forward.
And there's quite a big of an age gap between them too, right?
Yes, about a decade. She was a little bit older, about a decade. And there are alternating reports of who was married and who wasn't. And Judy was married, but what's fascinating is later in life, they did marry one another. So they did, ending. They did become, official.
That's pretty cute.
It really is.
You know, you don't normally hear stories about cryptid creatures like bringing two people together, you know? Normally it's just them just ripping them apart, you know, just limb from limb, you know what I'm saying?
What's interesting is I've done a lot of research on fear and attraction. And I did it for a book I did on supernatural dares where people test themselves by jumping over a grave and a witch will come out. And, you know, being afraid with somebody, the best first date you could go to is an amusement park or a scary movie, because when you're afraid with somebody and you get scared, you see that person as more attractive to you than you would if you just went to a stroll on the beach, for instance. So being scared does bring people together. It's why we like going to scary movies in a theater and, you know, amusement parks and the like. So they were onto something. They just didn't know it.
All right. Well, I'm going to tell you right now, that has not been my experience because I have scared the hell out of a lot of ladies and they do not call me back. So maybe I'm doing it wrong. I don't know. Maybe I'm doing it wrong.
All right. So then what was the next sighting after that couple?
Very next day, that evening, a young boy Christian was playing in his backyard as you went through, and he remembers the encounter. When I interviewed him, he didn't remember actually seeing the monster, but he remembers turning around and thinking, I want my mom. And he remembers being scared and running into the house. And at the same time, a couple of teenage lovebirds were on a swing out next door, and they saw the monster as well. So their mother runs over to Christian's mother and said, what's going on here? What should I do? And Christian's mother said, call the police. So the police come racing out there. It's the second night, and they actually can smell something. They see the grass that's leading off to the edge of the forested area is all pushed down. So they think something's happening. So they call in a dog tracker. So this dog handler comes in with his trained German Shepherd. They follow a trail down to a barn, and the dog won't go in. Mm-hmm. And apparently the trainer's so upset, he kind of throws the dog into the barn, and the dog comes yelping out, refusing to go in. And they lost track of the creature at that old barn. But I thought it was always interesting when I talked to one of the officers that was there that night. He said, yeah, that trainer was really upset because his dog was trained to go follow these scents, and he refused. I mean, a huge German Shepherd refused to go into that barn, sensing something out of the ordinary.
Okay, I'm going to be honest with you guys, all right? The part of me that loves horror movies, when you said that, like, they went inside the barn and they couldn't find the creature and the dog didn't come with them and stuff, I just pictured that they missed, like, this hole, like, kind of in the ground. There's a couple boards missing maybe from the wall, and maybe a thing of plywood, like, just kind of laying over, like a portion of kind of obscuring it a little bit, maybe hay bale or something, right? And it just empties into this bigger, like, sort of cave system under the area. Or it's sitting up in the rafters the whole time, watching them from above.
That's awesome.
Okay. Anyway. Now, Chad, the officer you spoke to, was that Officer Manwaring? Is that the one?
Yeah, Ron Manwaring. By the time we spoke with him, he was retired, but he still recalled that night because he had been off, he told us, the night before at Riverside Park when the lovebirds had their sighting. So when he came in the next night, they kind of briefed him on what had been going on. And at the time, he told me he was really scared because he thought if this was a hoax, somebody's going to get shot, because he said that at that time, the place was a really heavy gun country. And back in 2018, 17, when half the people I interviewed when I was researching, they were armed when I interviewed them. So the place is still a heavily gun-friendly location. So the officers were upset that if this wasn't something running around, or if it was a madman or a bear or whatever it could be, they were afraid somebody was just going to start shooting and there'd be many fatalities, because once the news spread, it really did take over the town.
So what do you mean took over the town?
Townsfolk living there told me it was like a zoo. People all times of the day and night were driving along Riverside Park. They were driving through this suburban neighborhood looking for the monster, all drinking and ready to battle.
Okay, first off, drinking and ready to battle. I mean, that is an awesome album title. Maybe even like an autobiography title, or maybe like a tattoo, or something. Anyway, but that said, this sort of mob mentality that sort of overtakes these small towns. I mean, this is pretty common, right? Anytime that there's sort of a monster in their midst, one of those where like these wannabe monster hunters, they just descend on these small towns.
Yeah.
And you hear the stories of them just walking through people's yards, and like people waking up and just finding people just camped out on their property.
Wow.
And many times they're not even from the community. They're just weirdos from out of town that just sort of show up. But that's fairly common, isn't it? In stories like this, I mean.
Well, we think of these things today as getting so much publicity and people flock to these places. But back then, it was people were writing from all over the world looking for more information from the Murphysboro Police Department, and they have a huge file on the Big Muddy Monster, which is available online now, where they included a lot of those letters from all over the world. And many of them were from big game hunters who said, if you let me, I'll come hunt this thing. I'll track it and I'll get it for you. All you have to do is allow me to do it. And of course, they never took up any of those offers.
Yeah, but if I'm being 100% honest, that makes total sense. I mean, if you're already worried about someone getting shot, the last thing you want to do is introduce even more guns to the situation, But, as long as we're on the subject of guns, Chad, maybe you can answer this for me. Now, I have heard on the night of the original report, when the cops went out to go investigate, and it was all swampy and soupy, and they're looking for stuff, and they heard that sound. They heard that sound out in the woods, and it scared them off. That one of the officers actually dropped his service revolver, dropped it as they were running out, and he left it. He actually didn't go back into the morning to go get it. Is that true? Did you find out in your investigation? Did you find out if that's true?
That was never in any of the reports, any of the police reports, any of the early newspaper articles. It wasn't until we were in 2018 interviewing the photographer that came that night, because after the officers came, they found the place was completely flooded. So it was muddy everywhere, high water. And so officers show up, and then they say they found these big slats or indentations in the mud, and they called in Larry Tincher, who was a photographer working with the department. He later became the police chief. When I was interviewing him, he said, something, that when Jimmy Nash went out there, he was one of the first officers, and he was walking through the woods. They could still smell the stench from what the lovebirds reported. But the creature was nowhere to be found, but they heard this loud squeal or scream of some sort. And Jimmy Nash had pulled his revolver and dropped it in the woods. And he was so frightened, he refused to go back and get it. He ran out of the woods. And it wasn't until a few hours later when he garnered the courage to go back and grab his revolver. And it never made, for obvious reasons, it never made the media or any reports. But all the other officers gave him a ribbing and a hard time because he was so frightened he lost his weapon. So, yes, there is truth to that.
Oh,
and that illustrates the importance of digging back sometimes. That was never in any official capacity or any official document or anything. It wasn't until we dug it up, and he Larry just kind of threw it out there like offhanded, like it wasn't a big deal. And we were looking at, me and my co-authors, we're looking at one another thinking, this is a big thing that nobody knew. So that was a lot of fun, knowing these tried and tested police officers were so frightened by the idea of a Bigfoot creature that they wouldn't even go back into the woods.
I mean, okay, so this is just sort of a testament to how real this was to them, how scared they were. Because I mean, I don't know what requirements and what kind of training they got back then, but I have to assume if you just lost your gun, like you just lost your service revolver, and they're like, oh, where is it? And you're like, I lost it because I was afraid and I didn't go back and get it because I was scared. I mean, at that point, you're just done being a cop, right? I mean, they just boot you off the force, I would assume. I don't know. So so what did Nash have to say about that? Did he have an excuse?
Yeah, and unfortunately, Officer Nash had passed away before I was able to speak with him to get his side of things and maybe clear it up. But I always thought that was great. And he was involved the next night as well. One of the first, him and Ron Manwaring showed up when the creature was in the suburban neighborhood. So we had this guy involved with a couple of the sightings. So I find that fascinating that even though he was frightened the night before, he still went out the next night and did his duty.
You got to give it to the guy.
I wonder if the dog was able to keep his job too.
Yeah, that's great. They probably fired that poor dog. He already got thrown into a barn. Didn't want to go. So that was probably sent him to a farm in the country.
Oh, yeah. He went to go live on a farm, in quotation marks. Yeah, we know what that means. Oh, it's the 70s, folks. Things were different. Anyway, so after this, are there any more sightings around that time, or is that it?
So that was June 25th and June 26th. And just about a week later, July 7th, they were having a 4th of July carnival down at the near Riverside Park in the area. And for several nights that the carnival was there, the workers were reporting seeing this giant Bigfoot-like creatures. And eventually it got so much that one night in the middle of the night, they saw this thing lurking by their ponies that they would use to give pony rides to the kids. And it seemed to be extremely fascinated with these ponies, but not really in a harmful or menacing way, but just more curious and watching them. And that's when they reported it to the carnival operator. And at the end of the carnival, the operator contacted the police and made the report. And when they asked him why he hadn't made it several nights ago, he said, "We were afraid it was going to scare off business, that if people heard there was a monster lurking about, they wouldn't bring their kids down to the rides," which today might be exact opposite of what would happen.
Yeah, an attraction.
Yeah, there's a Bigfoot here. All of a sudden, people are there. So I found that fascinating, too, that not only was it curious about other animals, but that the carnies wanted to keep it under wraps until they could make all their money.
Oh, my God. I'm going to tell you right now, Hollywood needs to jump on this. How the hell do we not already have Cryptids versus Carnies, the movie? You know what I'm saying? Oh, my God. I would pay good money to see that. Are you kidding me? I am picturing like a 20-plus film franchise like the MCU or something. Oh, my God. Oh, my God. How are you not already making this? This is money in the bank, baby. I guess some people are just afraid of money, I guess. I don't know.
And there were other sightings in between as well, but nothing that reached the publicity or the fervor that the first one really made the splash, and then a couple others, but then it died down over time. And there were still sightings, especially down in the Shawnee National Forest and other Bigfoot creatures, but it died down a bit until the 1980s again.
So what happened in the 1980s?
Well, just when people in Murphysboro had forgotten a bit about the Big Muddy and thought maybe it was safe to go out after dark again. 1988, Bob Ryman, who was a junkyard dealer on the outskirts of town, he had owned a junkyard out there for over a decade at the time. And at the time, he was having trouble with teenagers coming in at night and ripping out the tape decks and the radios and the like out of the cars. So he hired an off-duty officer as his night security guard, Charlie. And they had this pact together that if either of them encountered some intruders, they would call the other one so that they could go together and confront the intruders together, a little more safety. And about 1:30 at night, Charlie calls Bob and said, "Bob, something's out in the junkyard." So Bob raced over there, and together him and Charlie walked back. And Bob said he was immediately overtook by the stench in the area. Something was in the area that smelled horrible. And Bob told me he could see something big moving along the stacks of the discarded vehicles. And then they noticed these red eyes moving about, but they were attached to something 7 feet tall. And when he got there, they saw this monster, this beast, white furred, caked in mud, 7 to 8 feet tall. He estimated it to be 300 to 500 pounds. And Charlie was armed. And Charlie asked Bob, "Should I shoot this thing?" And Bob told me, rightly so. He said, smartly, he said, "No, we don't know what this thing's capable of. If you shoot it, it might harm us." And the most interesting is Bob said the thing was mumbling to itself, talking to itself in some unknown language. But also when it was making screams, it sounded like a police siren, that it would go up and pitch and come back down. And this
that's
thing
interesting.
So this thing seemed to be mumbling to itself, and they didn't shoot it. They started to backtrack, and this thing started following them on the edge of their sight. So they wanted to take it by a motion detected light on one of their buildings to get a good look at it. But he said it seemed to show some intelligence because it avoided that light. So they went back into their garage and called some of Bob's family to come over. They were terrified. Once the family got there, they started hearing banging on the sides of the garage. Started out really low, and then it got heavier, banging, louder. Eventually, Bob said he thought the thing was throwing big boulders at the side of the building.
Wow.
Bob told me he didn't think the thing was trying to break in and get them because he thought it easily could have. He thought, in a more sinister manner, the thing was trying to scare them, to elicit fear.
Yeah, that is absolutely terrifying. I mean, can you imagine like a creature like that just sending you the message, "Hey, I could kill you anytime I wanted to, but I'm choosing not to. For now. Sleep tight."
Bob told me worked pretty well because I've interviewed Bob several times over the last many years, and he said he still has nightmares about that night. He has sold the junkyard, moved out of the area, but he still remembers that experience like it happened the day before.
So, Chad, just out of curiosity here, now you mentioned that they were making this weird sound, right? This sort of strange mumbling sort of sound. Now, I have heard other stories where they have described that sound as sounding vaguely like someone impersonating a bad kung fu movie. Okay, now that's what I've heard. Now I don't know if that's what this is. Okay, but I just want to point out I am a Sasquatch and I have never made that sound. So I don't know. Maybe I'm not Sasquatching right. Maybe I've been Sasquatching wrong all these years. Who knows?
It seems to be along that same line. You're right. Many people say it. It seems to have some Asian flavor to it. The language, they can't quite make out what it is, but it sounds like it resembles Asian languages or someone doing a bad impression of an Asian language. And he didn't know. He just said it was mumbling to itself. It seemed to be not just nonsense. It seemed to be some type of language, but he couldn't decipher it. And of course, he was extremely terrified. It was dark. The thing had glowing red eyes to it, and they were concerned with their safety more so than anything else. And when they backtracked, they had their weapon. And what's fascinating is this will give you a little insight into national TV shows as well. Because I was watching, I won't say what show, but I saw Bob on a show recounting his experience. And he said, well, then I went to grab my weapon and Charlie told me not to fire. So when I interviewed Bob later after seeing that, I said, Bob, now in our first couple interviews, you told me Charlie was the armed one. And this is getting a bit into the weeds. But in the show I watched, you said you were armed. Did they have you say that? And he said, yeah, of course. And because I know how TV works, that if they're interviewing the person, they'd rather say that he was the one who was going to shoot rather than someone who's off camera and they don't interview. So a lot of people watch these things on TV and they don't quite get the story accurate. And that was one where Bob wasn't armed. He wasn't going to shoot, but on the TV show, he was.
Jesus Christ. First, they faked the moon landing. Now this. Oh, my God. Where does it end? Where does it end, Chad Lewis?
Yeah, and I mean, that happens all the time. I remember I did an interview for one certain monster for a TV show, and I had done many of their episodes. They cut out my description and used it for a different monster on a different show of theirs. So sometimes, here I am talking about Monster A, and they just splice it into Monster B because, what's it matter? It's all Same for thing. Fun anyway, I guess.
Oh, my God. Who would do something like that? Take another person's words and then just re-edit them any way you feel like, willy-nilly, just so you can make them say and do what you want, like a puppet on a string? That is horrifying. Horrifying. I don't. You know what? I'm going to ask you this: who's the real monster? You know what I'm saying? Jesus, my God, I am shocked and appalled, and a little hungry, but mostly shocked and appalled.
So when you were down there, did you experience anything? Did you see any tracks or smell anything?
We've been down there many times. We've camped in the area quite a bit, and nothing out of the ordinary for me. Now, the river that Muddy Monsters was said to have come out of, and there was a terrible smell on the second night of the sightings, too, in the suburban neighborhood. They all felt like it was this musty odor. You could pick it up right away, but the river itself is named the Big Muddy because it's big and it's extremely muddy. And I've been in several of the rivers down there, and you come out looking like the Big Muddy Monster. When I asked people about if anyone swims in there or kayaks, and they said, no, you do not go into that water. You stay above it. So the idea of that it's somebody in a Bigfoot suit, which I've talked to several people who claimed that they were the hoaxers. Multiple different people who all claimed that it was them there on Riverside Park, that they had concocted this perfume of Bigfoot stench, and they had these big footprints cast made out of wood, which they conveniently have lost. But most of them did not have any evidence that they were there. I always hold out the possibility that it could have easily been hoaxed, but people who come forward never have any evidence no photos of them there at the time or dressed up. The suit's gone. The footprints are gone, all that. So that's always interesting too, is that a lot of people will come out and claim that they were the actual originators of the legend rather than they may have hoaxed one sighting of the legend.
So, Chad, and correct me if I'm wrong here, all right? But this story really kicks off in June of 1973 in Murphysboro, Illinois, right? Right? Now, here's my question. The previous year, in May of 1972, okay, in Peoria, Illinois, was the spotting of the Coal Hollow Road monster, all right? And 2 years before that, in July of 1970, was when the Farmer City monster was spotted in Farmer City, Illinois. So my question is, all three of these stories feature a white-furred Bigfoot-type creature, all right, all within a couple hundred miles of each other over the course of 3 years, all in Illinois. And I'm just curious, do you feel like there's some sort of connection between these stories?
Yes, and I talked with a gentleman who claimed, again, that he was the originator of the Farmer City monster. But what's interesting is he told me that they were making up stories based on previous sightings. So that, again, they did not hoax the entire thing. They were hoaxing one segment of it. The Farmer City and that whole area of, remember Momo, the Missouri monster, that was big around the same time. The 70s, I don't know what was going on in the country, but if you were a Bigfoot enthusiast, the 70s would be the time you'd want to travel back in time to explore, because Bigfoot creatures were exploding all over, and Illinois was no different. You had many different, not only the Bigfoot creatures, you had like the Enfield horror happening. You had other creatures, which was a big kangaroo type looking thing that was on someone's doorstep. And so you had all these things happening in the same area around the same time, which for some people, the creature was 8 feet tall. There was one report of it being 10 feet tall. Sometimes it was 6 feet tall. Sometimes its fur seemed to be more of a silver than white or brown. So I don't know if these people were seeing the same thing and perceiving it different, or seeing different things. And there would often be years between big muddy monster sightings, which you would think if this thing's inhabiting an area physically, like a bear or a moose, that there'd be more occasional sightings than there were. It's like this thing's there for a couple weeks and then gone for 3 years, and then all of a sudden back. It makes zero sense.
Or it's just traveling around, making a loop.
Yeah, it could be migrating about. Many people, because there's substantial cave systems in that area, believe that it might be traveling underground as well.
Look, I'm going to be honest with you guys. This sounds a lot like my mom's dad. You know what I'm saying? I'm not going to call him grandpa. I never met the guy, but I'm going to tell you right now. Now, that guy would show up, for a couple of weeks, and then he'd go to work, and then he'd vanish for like years, and then all of a sudden he'd just pop back up like nothing ever happened. And then he'd be there for a couple of weeks, and then he'd vanish again. And I mean, as it turns out, he did have like multiple wives with numerous kids, just scattered across the U.S. None of them the wiser of the other. Yeah. I mean, yeah, and it took a long time. It took a long time for them to untangle those Christmas lights. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know. Maybe this guy had like a thing going. I mean, I don't want to judge the guy, but I'm totally going to judge the guy. You know what I'm saying?
I'm like, where are you going with this? Okay. So, Chad, how did you go ahead and start meeting these people and interviewing them? Were you just like, you know what, let's go find this person and see if they want to talk to us and try not to get shot? Like, how did that happen?
Being that it was almost 40 years later that we were revisiting this case, our first concern was, are these people going to be still alive? Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, many of them were deceased. But for the other ones, especially those in a law enforcement position, they were happy to talk about it. Talked to several of the officers who were more than willing to get the story down. And Manwaring, Ron, he told us the reason he was continuing to do interviews, it's so many people got it wrong, that he wanted to set the record right. And that's why he was still doing it, even though he was in failing health when we talked with him. So a lot of people you just reach out to, and you'd be surprised at how open they are. And then, as always happens, once the book comes out and it reaches a broader audience, people start to come forward. Like Christian Burrell, he showed up at one of Kevin and I's presentations in Murphysboro and said, I was the witness as a young boy who saw it. And we got to talk with him and ended up interviewing him several times. And then they can bring you on to other people. But so the second night when Christian had his sighting, there was a teenage couple on the swings next to him, Randy and Cheryl. And I contacted Randy, and he was one of those who wanted nothing to do with it. And not because he didn't care for it or he didn't like it anymore. He was just done with it. He said, it was just one night of my life. I don't want it to, take over my entire adult existence, that I don't want it to be that big of an anchor in my life. So he said, nothing bad or that, but I just don't want to deal with it anymore. He was really polite and just said, no, thanks. So sometimes you get that. And I've always felt that as researchers, we put too much on these witnesses. We put too much expectation on them, because something happened to them that they can't explain. And we expect them now, 20 years later or 30 years, to have this epiphany of what happened when we don't know what happened as investigators researching all of this. They're as puzzled as we are. And most of the witnesses that I've spoken with on all across the board cases, they're still as baffled as they were when they had their experience. They have no other thoughts on it that have come after 20 years. In fact, sometimes it's the exact opposite. Their memory fades, the feelings fade. So I think sometimes we want to touch back in with people, check back in with them to see what they think now 30 years later. And then we're disappointed when they think the same thing, which makes sense.
And to go along with what you said, Chad, I mean, sometimes I think we just sort of forget that these witnesses are, they're just people, they're just people. And we're viewing their lives through this, this lens of this one weird event that happened to them. But, they're just regular people, and, who probably don't necessarily want their lives defined by this one thing that happened to them, And now with the, with things like social media, we actually have access to these people. I mean, you can hunt them down. They're on there, They're just normal people posting photos of their grandkids or what they had for dinner or, whatever. And then you just jump on there, befriend them, and just harass the shit out of them until eventually they agree to be on your podcast. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I don't know.
See what happens. Yeah, it is. And that's why I've always been where if somebody says they don't want to do it, I just thank them. I never follow up like, are you sure? Because, the story would be great. It's just, hey, if you ever want to talk, here's my contact, but let it go. Because again, it's rare that I've ever interviewed somebody years later that had an encounter that now has more insight, or there's that detail that you forget. Sometimes, like with the police officer, it happened, but they weren't a witness. So sometimes witnesses just want to be left alone, and then other times they take great pride in it. They're fascinated. It sets them off on a kind of life path of researching this stuff or being curious about it. But I love how witnesses often will keep to their story the entire time. Decades will pass and they've never embellished it. They've never exaggerated. They've never changed it to fit the times or to make it more exciting. And I've even thrown out bait to these witnesses to give them an opportunity to embellish it or to make it more grand. And oftentimes when I throw that out, they'll say, no, that's not the way it happened. This is what really happened. So I always love that most of them are just down to earth, rational people who have had something weird happen to them.
And it's more believable when they don't change the story either. So
it really is, especially when we're starting to really learn how memory works, that every time you retrieve a memory and put it back, it changes a little bit. And that 30 years later, after doing that 300 times, your initial memory is going to be quite different than 30 years past. Yeah. So that's why I always like when the newspapers are there at the time to collect the most accurate accurate story because we just know how memory works now, and we know how unreliable it is 30 years later.
That is one thing I would definitely say, that when we are working on the Today in Creepy History posts, we try to always go back to the original newspaper stories, because it is amazing how different it will be when you get, names will change. Not just the spellings, but entire names. And there'll be entire people that they just left out of the story. Like you were mentioning earlier, the Enfield horror, that guy's kids disappeared at some point from those stories. Like originally he had 2 kids,
really?
and then they were just gone. And to the point where, we had people telling us we got it wrong. So yeah, no, I totally get that.
And that brings up a great point, as more and more newspapers, especially small ones, are failing and going bankrupt and they're dying out, that who's going to be around to collect these stories and these adventures? Certainly hope not the internet, because, we won't have anything of accuracy. But, some of the best research, I think, to a researcher is the archives, the newspaper archives that are available, because they're the most accurate. And you're right, Sam, that these things sometimes just morph and progress, and names change, date change, cities change. And you're right, McDaniel's children were gone from that story of the trailer. It was just him and his wife. And oftentimes that becomes the narrative.
So, Chad, has there been any recent sightings that you know of?
There have been a ton, and a lot of them are reported to the Bigfoot Research Organization, BFRO, or other Bigfoot sites, but nothing that grabs the attention like the main stories from the 70s and 80s. Oftentimes, they're only shared among Bigfoot groups. The media doesn't pick it up. It's not sensational enough. But yes, it seems like every week or two, somebody comes forward with a sighting, and oftentimes they don't even report it. They might contact you and say, I didn't know who to report it to, or I didn't think anybody would believe me. So they don't report it at all. And I find that quite common, that I've had people come up to me and tell me a story that they haven't told anyone for 40 years. And they said, I don't even want you to research it. I just don't want to die with it. I want the story put down on paper so it's out there.
So, Chad, where can people find you and this book and everything else that you have to offer?
Well, to find me, go to the weirdest place you can think of, and I'm probably there. But my website, Chad Lewis Research, is just probably the best for if you have a story, if you want to tell me something or grab a guide, whatever it is, come see my programs. It's all available on my website. And
The Big Muddy Monster, that's the book that we are talking about. That is available on your website as well?
It is, and they are actually having a festival, the Big Muddy Monster Festival, this June, late June, I think the 22nd or something like that. I'll be there in Murphysboro, re-experiencing the Muddy Monster.
So, Chad, if our listeners go to your website and they visit your store there at chadlewisresearch.com, is it still true that they can get any of your books autographed? Is that true?
Yeah, that's great. I'll sign them. I'll throw in some fun little gifts, extras for them. We used to smudge a little big muddy mud on the first page of the book, so you'll have something from the Muddy River when you get the book. So all that fun stuff that you can't get at the online stores when you order from them.
I love it. And it has all your tour dates too. I'm always checking that out. So I'm like, where is he going to be? Is he going to be in the area?
I love that you called it tour dates. I feel like, the Rat Pack, Frank Sinatra on tour. Yeah, I'm opening up for the Rolling Stones next week on tour. We got a gig. So, well, I love that. Yeah.
You're a celebrity in our house. All right, Chad, thank you so much for being on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Chad. Thank you for agreeing to talk with us today, but also thank you for agreeing to be our very first guest on our very first podcast, And thank you for helping us keep it creepy. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I'm getting there.
Well, that's completely unacceptable, but I'm going to let it slide because you're a nice guy.
That would be great.
Bye.
You know what? I got to say, for our first time out, that wasn't too bad. I think it went pretty good, But, man, I don't know. That Chad Lewis, God, I love that man.
Me too.
He's such a good dude. He's such a good dude. And you know what? I know he's from Wisconsin, so he's like 50% serial killer. It just happens. It just happens. Okay, but it's something in the water. Anyway. You know what? Why don't you say the outro and we can get out of here? And first round's on me.
You don't want to do this? You want me to do it?
Look, if I'm being honest here, Laura Kram, I'll tell you right now, I ain't got any gas left in this tank. You know what I'm saying? I am just wiped out. So, why don't you take the reins, all right, and just bring this sucker home? You know what I'm saying? Let's slap it up there on the old vision board, and let's manifest an ending to this son of a bitch, all right?
Okay. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. Visit us at creepyacres.com and be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube.
And as always, hey, keep it creepy.